I think objects that have had a life before we come to them are much more interesting than brand new things. So an old book or something that we find that was used in a kitchen hundreds of years ago. And this video started with an experiment because I wanted to recreate a sort of field book that a naturalist would use because I'm doing some work on Eleanor Glanville. And I started writing, and then I thought I'm going to try some wax. I've had this beeswax for ages and see how that affects the pages. And I've also made a collage panel piece, and I love the way how the wax gives it a real mellowness and this sort of aged translucent effect, and it also has a practical purpose because it will protect your papers and your collage or your journal, and I think it's got lots of applications. So I'm going to show you, it's just quite basic. This is just using beeswax. It might be an old candle that you have. You need sort of fairly basic equipment and you can make these wonderful mellow pages. This wax layering technique would work equally well on photographs and fabric or letters or any sort of ephemera you've got, and it's got so many kind of applications. But because I want to recreate this 17th century field note or notebook, I'm using some Japanese paper, principally because I had it already and it's handmade, so it's got that sort of textured look that old paper would have. And I've made some notes about what I'm going to write, and I'm using cursive writing. I've learned how to do this. I'm not that good at it yet, but I think that's fine, because if somebody was out in the field making notes, they're not going to have the steadiest writing. And of course, it would have been done with a quill at the time. So I'm just using a dip pen and a nib and some waterproof ink because I'm going to be dunking it in some tea and perhaps coffee just to age the paper. So I've worked out some notes. I've looked up, done as much research. There's not that much on her, but I have found some accounts of things she actually did and her activities, and I've looked at contemporary accounts of what people were doing. So this is just an approximation. I'm not trying to exactly recreate it, but I thought I'd do a little bit of practice first. And I did 2 sheets of the same paper, telling the same story, just so that I've got 2 to practice with. And I just used some old tea that I had in the cupboard and added some boiling water just to, I wasn't quite sure what the quantity to use was. So I'm just experimenting at this stage. And I left them in for, I think, about half an hour or so. And they did come out, they did take a nice sort of tan colour, but then I thought I'd see what would happen if I put some, well, first of all, I tried tea leaves directly on, which didn't seem to do a lot. So then I'm using a bit of instant coffee and holding it from a height and to see what effect that would achieve. I left them to dry near a radiator because I was impatient, as always, and they have curled up a bit, but I actually really like that, and I think they've got a really sort of authentic look. But then I started thinking about it. They do look really old, but I don't want them to look like they are. I kind of want them to look more immediate, because it's such an interesting concept, isn't it? Making something look aged to make it authentic. But if I wanted to look like it had been used fairly recently. So after this, although I really like the sort of foxen that you got from the coffee grains, I decided I wasn't going to do that with my main pieces. I was just going to use the tea dip just to get that slightly browny effect. And that's what you'll see me doing next. I'm now going to read to you the papers that I've written, but if you're not interested, just skip to the next section. All the sections will be as chapters, so you can find which bits you're interested in. Here goes. May the 18th. I took Lizzie and Maud with me to the glade next to the brook where the plantain grow. We will endeavour to catch some of the loopers, that I may observe them at home and record how they change. We use some old linen and place it beneath the plants and verily shake them onto the sheets. I then placed them into a wooden box I had fashioned for the purpose. I added fresh leaves daily, which initially they feasted on. One died for want of air, I believe. From now on, I will expose them to fresh air every morn. I believe they will begin to change very soon. The 23rd. It is now 5 days since we collected our worms. I fear we were seen by some village folk that day who do not think such behaviour is proper in a lady. I have put twigs in with the grubs, and some have climbed up and now have made silken threads by which they hang. Their cocoons have formed and grow harder every day. June the 6th. Today was a wonder to behold, as from the unsightly carapace I have watched so closely, a fully grown butterflage slowly emerged. Its crumpled wings looked limp and damp, so I took it out to the orchard, where I watched the glorious creature come to life. Now these are all done and dry, I'm putting them in the tea solution just to soak for about half an hour, and then they'll have that lovely mellow tan look to them. And then once they're out of this and completely dry, I'm going to take them outside to where I've got a little hob and some wax to do the next stage. And I think this worked really well for my project for my note papers that are supposed to look like field notes. And I think because they're going to be part of an exhibition, I think it will help protect them as well. So I've come out here because when you use beeswax, which is the first method we're going to use, it does give off a bit of a fume. And because I'm lucky I've got this place and it's got electricity, I can do it outside, although it's quite nippy today. And there's a bit of a breeze, so I hope it doesn't blow all my papers away. All you need is some sort of heat source. As you can see, if you've ever done batik and you've got one of those boiler things, you could use that, or a gas flame if you're very careful, but obviously you're using paper. So I think a fixed, a solid ring like these works really well. So there's a bit of smoke coming off there. I'm going to turn down this one. And this is an old baking dish. The non-stick coating started breaking up, and that's not very good for you to ingest. And actually some of it, when I used this before, some of it came away into the wax, which actually I didn't mind because it gave a nice sort of grungy effect. But if you haven't got that, you could use one of those tin foil things that, ready meals sometimes come in. You just want something that you're not going to use for cooking afterward. So all you have to do, and you don't need like gallons, you just need enough for it to melt. Picking it up okay. And then what I'm going to do, before the precious ones that I've written myself, I'm just going to do, so I've got lots of papers here that sort of pertain to this project on the Glanville Fritillary. And this is a printout of a drawing that I've done. So all you need to do, got my trusty tongs over here. can see there is quite a bit of sort of muck on the bottom here, but as I say, I quite like that. And then when you take it out, you can see it's quite a lot of smoke. That's why I'm doing it out here. I'm going to put it on the plastic because if you put it on any other paper, it might just sort of stick to it. Some of these are just printouts on copy paper. I think I've got a bit of tissue paper. Maybe you've got an old sort of sheet from a book. I'm just quite curious to see how they come out because it's quite exciting. And I think, as I say, it does get quite addictive. I think that's enough there. So I'm going to try this one, which is actually a printout of some old lace. And I just wondered whether it would look more kind of convincing once it's got a bit of wax on. And it sort of, the initial kind of hardening up happens quite quickly. So I can get through a lot. It doesn't matter if I pile them up. So now I'm going to try this book page. Which is already quite sort of old. And you can see for some other project, I actually, with my die cutter, cut some butterfly shapes out. So that could be quite a useful piece of paper for something. I haven't got anything in particular in mind for some of these. And you can see that with this beeswax, I've had it a while. I don't know if they're all this dark, but it's a really sort of beautiful dark honey colour. So that's going to give a really lovely patina to the papers. And then this is actually I don't know whether this will work at all. This is a print I took straight from a leaf. So that's a foxglove leaf that I put through my die cutter. If you're interested, I'll link the video up the top. And because of the pigments in it, it actually forms this beautiful pattern on the page. Now, I don't know what will happen when I put it in wax. So this is all, as I say, this is all quite experimental. And this is slightly thicker paper. It might need a bit more of the wax. I'm going to go over the top. But you can already see it's got this sort of translucency about it, which is what I really like. So here's some thinner paper. This is calligraphy paper that I often use for printing on. And I think and I've got, this is from a stamp. So I've got a stamp of this sort of brocade damask. And, it's fairly boring at the moment. And you only need a very little to actually, because it's such thin paper. I really don't know what's going to happen with this. This is an embroidery. This is one of my embroidered butterflies, and I've got quite a lot of them. So I don't mind sacrificing one. I shall find out. I can put quite a lot in there because I want it to absorb really well. Right. So it'll be interesting to see what it looks like when it's dry. Put that one down there. Okay, here goes. It's not the end of the world if I ruin them. I can do them again. I've got more paper, got more ink. Right, here goes. They're coming up pretty well. So any more in, because these are my last ones. I just want to get some of that on the edge. Okay, and then the last one of all, it is actually a printout of a letter that was what from one of the scientists called James Pettifer, who was one of Eleanor's correspondents. And I've made this into a stencil and used it in lots of ways, but I just thought, I mean, it's just on regular copy paper, but I thought I was just curious to see how well this might come out. Get to the size and pick up. Switch this off. And wait, mine is getting really gritty. And that's I mean, that's a really big or in that top or some of that bit. So there. Right. So I'm going to let these dry completely and then I'll take them inside and show them all. So here are the finished waxed papers and these are my handwritten ones, and you can see what a lovely sort of finish that it's the real translucency of them that I love so much. It just makes them look sort of more parchmenty, and as I say, it also gives them some protection so they can be handled now. And I'm going to make some of these into a book, but I'm also going to use some of the other pieces for a collage, which I'll show you in a moment. And some of these pieces, especially the leaf, I think I put too much wax on them. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how I dealt with that and then show you how I used the pieces to make this collage. Plus, I'm going to show you how I put some of the fabric pieces in and then how to make an all over piece and how you can fuse everything together so it's a nice finished piece.